What I didn't realize that was the beginning of a very, very long process of awakening, of going through a spiritual identity crisis, of coming to terms with who I really am. My clairvoyant abilities that I tucked away for many, many years, the voices that I would hear in my mind that would always speak to me. It was a lot, and I didn't have a way to let it out. So,
Franco, I would love for you to share your near-death experience and just talk about how you got to where you are today, if you don't mind sharing.
oh my gosh, that could take a couple hours. No, just kidding. So I'll share with you the story,
Okay.
because that's the part that I was most fascinated with for most of my life. And then but what became pretty evident, not more than 10 years ago or so, was the stories behind the stories behind the stories, the messages that came through afterwards about that event and later on when I started to channel. So the near-death experience took place when I was extremely young. I was 6 months old. And so some people immediately, they hear that and they go, well, I'm going to check out. I don't know what this guy could possibly tell you when he was only 6 months old. But the interesting thing about my near-death experience is that it had sort of this dystopian feel to it. It actually really happened, at least for me, the experience when I was 15 or 16 years old, somewhere in that part. Up until that time in my life, I had no idea I had had a near-death experience. My parents, specifically my mom, because I grew up in somewhat of a dysfunctional family, so my mom was the one that was there, never shared the story. Later on, I was told that they were always waiting for the right time to tell the story. Well, as you know, there's never a right time to tell any kind of a story, right?
Right.
You just kind of jump right into it. So up until that time, I lived a very interesting life because I had been living in a place that others would refer to as a haunting. I lived in a house for 5 or 6 years that was massively paranormal.
Oof.
I mean, massively paranormal. But I thought of it as just normal because I was growing up in. And don't get me wrong, I did understand there was some really bizarre stuff going on, but I didn't have a problem as much with it over time because it was just kind of part of the whole process of my life. So by the time I was 15, 16, and I started to have these visions and these dreams, and I do make a distinction between these visions and dreams because the visions often happen just during the day, mostly when I was waking up and I was in a very lucid state. And the dreams were actually happening in dreams. And they started out very infrequent, and then they became very frequent. And it was always the same dream. And up until that point, I should mention this, I never have said this before, but up until that point, I was always having dreams over and over again. So I didn't really pay too much attention to it. But this one was really different because this one, I could actually feel something that I couldn't necessarily describe as my 5 senses kind of a sensation. It was more of a 6th sense thing where I could feel energies, and I could feel energies translated as emotions or thoughts. And this was the first time I had ever had anything really like that I was aware of. And
how old were you when this happened?
It started right when I was about 15 years old. And it was also a time in my life where I was having a real serious identity crisis because I knew that I was different and there was no way for me to describe that difference. I didn't feel like I was meant to be here. I didn't feel comfortable with my own skin. I didn't feel comfortable with anything. Nothing made sense. I was being force fed into believing a lot of things that 2 and 2 equals 6. And I had to accept it in the way that the world was working. And it just really didn't make sense. And I was really kind of concerned because I'm 15 years old and I haven't even begun experiencing my life. And yet I'm already picking up all of this stuff. And I didn't know how to translate that. So there was, back then there just wasn't the support system that there is today that could help me through this, to navigate this. And even if it were happening today, it would still be a rather challenging process. But anyway, so I was having these dreams, these visions, and it was always taking me back to this moment in time when I was in a hospital I didn't really recognize because it didn't feel like the hospitals here. And I actually lived for a short period of time. I was born and I lived for 8 months, in South America. And so I kind of felt like I was back there, and I found myself in a room. And in this room, there was my mom and my aunt and some other ladies who I didn't know. There were also doctors and nurses coming in, and my mother was on the bed, and there was an incubator type of contraption next to the bed, and people were focusing their attention on this little baby. And it didn't take very long for me to realize that the baby in this whole dream vision was me. And that took a little processing, but even though it took a little processing, it felt also quite natural. Like I was very connected to this little image of a baby. But my attention really focused on my mom most of the time because I could feel drawn to her emotions. I could feel drawn to her thoughts. It wasn't like I was picking them up audibly, but I could feel them in a sensory way that I knew almost telepathically, that I knew what she was going through and inwardly. And I remember when the doctor came in. So by the way, I was in this hospital because I had been brought there earlier in the day. I had these symptoms that were pretty much at the time seemed natural: coughing, sneezing, cold-like symptoms. So she thought I was just having a bad cold. But it turned out that I had pneumonia, and it was a pretty aggressive stage of pneumonia. And so my coughing was getting worse. Everything was getting worse. I had fever. Everything was kind of going in the wrong direction. And so she, when she got pulled out of the room by one of the doctors, I remember it was kind of like how you see it in the movies. You're kind of standing next to the person, to the two people, but they don't see you. You can hear everything and see the conversation. And he's telling her that it's not looking very good, that they didn't think I was going to make it through the night. In fact, they felt like I had a few hours left to live. So they really wanted the family to come together, and they wanted to make things comfortable for the family. So he asked if they could bring in the chaplain and the priest to be there to pray and to do the last rites. And at this point, I remember that the audibleness of that conversation kind of started fading away because I was, again, really tapped into her consciousness stream, and I could feel that she was disconnecting from everything. And she later on recalls that she doesn't remember exactly all of what was said. She was just totally disconnected. And so she actually got back in the room, grabbed a few things and like her purse and left the hospital at a time when they were telling her that she only had a few hours left for me to be alive. But she decided she wanted to leave the hospital. There was a church several blocks away. She walked down to that church. She was a very Catholic person, and devout Catholic. And
you're still watching all of this happen.
I'm watching.
You're watching her go into the church, and
I'm guiding her. I mean, I'm not guiding her. I'm just there. I mean, I'm living this experience where I'm just with her the whole time. It was like I was transferring when she was having this transferring consciousness stream. In the dream, I was all of a sudden, one moment I was in the hospital, next moment I was walking with her down the street, and the next moment it would just fast forward a little bit. We're now in front of the church, and by the time she was at the church, so it was wherever her consciousness was going, I was going with it. Mm-hmm. And so next moment she's by the church. She's about half a block away. It's a boulevard. I could picture it very clearly, even though years later, I mean, I finally got to see the picture of the church, but I didn't really know there was a boulevard there. And she gets on her knees and she starts to pray as she's going towards the church, and on her knees, crawls up the stairs and into the church and up to the altar, and it gets into this real deep prayer. But it wasn't a prayer the way in which we're all kind of accustomed to, the, please, please, please kind of energy wasn't there. She was really, really in this very heavy meditative state where she was really grateful and appreciative of the time that she had. And I remember sitting there and I was just astounded that I was even experiencing all this, but there was a moment where it was just starting to become really natural, that I was just there and I could hear her words. They were mumbling words, but in her consciousness, they were very clear to me. And I was astounded that she was speaking about my life with so much gratitude and appreciation. Here I was, 6 months old, and she was willing to accept that her time with me was over, but doing so with such love and such appreciation for that moment, that it felt different. It felt lighter. It didn't feel the way that you would normally feel a prayer would be. And at that moment, as she was deep into this meditation, there was a series of visions that occurred that gave her the opportunity to see what my life would have been had I stayed here, to give her a sense of watching her son grow up and become a man and a husband and a loving father and a loving son. And she saw this, and I was watching this, and it was very emotional, and I could feel sort of the genuine, again, sense of love and appreciation she had for being given the chance to see something that she was never going to be able to touch, taste, feel, or anything in this world. And so I was starting, in my dream, I was really getting choked up, and she was obviously really, really crying at this point, but everything was about thankfulness, the gratitude of it. At that moment, the air lifted, the energy in the room. And that was the other thing. I could feel the feeling of the energy in the room, and the energy in the church just really changed. It became super light, super comforting and loving and embracing. And she stopped. She just stopped, felt the sense of relief, a sense of peace. And she got up, and she knew at that moment that no matter what she was going to experience when she got to the hospital, that she was at peace with it. And so she left the church, walked back to the hospital, and was greeted by a bunch of her family and the doctors and staff at the door. This was a very small hospital, and they were crying. And so she expected the worst. Instead, they told her that while she was gone, everything had changed. My vitals had changed. The organs that were starting to shut down were coming back. My fever had broken. They were all ecstatic. And, back then, even still to this day, when something like that happens, you just kind of chalk it up as, I don't know what happened. It must have been a miracle, and life goes on. And right. She, being a devout Catholic, was like, I'll check. That's perfect for me. I'm fine with that. I can live with that story. My sister later told me many years later, that when she got home, when my mom came home, she started crying, telling everybody, I think I saved him. It was a miracle. It was a miracle. Sure enough, the next day I left. Now, that's the sort of the part one. The part two of this is what happened when I was having visions and dreams coincided with this. And that's a little bit more, I'll give you more of an abbreviation of this part, but
can I ask you before you go into that, answer this, if not, so were you able to validate with your mother to say, hey mom, I had this dream and this is what happened, A, B, C, D, and E, and you were wearing this and you were in this car. Like, was she able to be like, what the heck? What happened?
Yeah. So this whole thing went on for at least a good 3-6 months, easily, maybe more.
Reliving the same experience for 6 months?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Pretty much.
So you're seeing this in your mind for 6 months.
Yeah.
Before you actually tell your mom? Or
yeah, I was going insane.
oh my goodness.
It was to the point where I had to say something to somebody, because I knew that this wasn't just my typical dream-like experiences. Because like I said, I had these types of dreams before. I grew up in the book. I talk about how I grew up with lucid dreaming a lot. So to me, it didn't seem too unusual to have these kind of experiences, except that these were so frequent and so deep, and it got to the point where it was really melding into my life so much I couldn't make heads or tails of what was real and what wasn't real anymore. I finally sat down with her. She was in the kitchen, and I finally, I was scared to death about sharing this information. And the reason I was because, remember I said that I had lived in the hauntings. We weren't there at this point. We had left that several years ago, but that had left a massive scar on our family, and many people in my family suffered from that experience. I mean, it's not unusual to suffer from an experience like that, because we're talking serious paranormal stuff happened there. We even had an exorcism there.
Really?
So,
like you had a priest come in and do an exorcism.
Yes. And
that's wild.
Yeah. And he wasn't initially successful with it, so he had to bring help.
Not on you, but on somebody else in your family?
Somebody else, yeah. And so there was this thing that was there, right? And so this heaviness and this memory was very, very fresh and raw in our lives. And then here I come, and I'm having these experiences that would have potentially put me in the category of either serious medication or serious discussion about, is this a part 2 experience? And so, anyway, so I did not want to be the part 2, because I saw what part 1 had looked like, and it wasn't good. So, so I really kept this a secret, and I really tried to keep it under the rug for as long as I could. But when I finally told her, she was in the kitchen, and I just, I remember I just broke down, and I was like, look, I really need to share something with you, because you're in the dream. You're outside of me. You're the main character of the dream. And I feel that I need to share this at least, and see if any of this might ring true. You know, do you have any recollection of any of this? I just wanted any kind of sense of reassurance that there might have been something meaningful about these dreams that I wasn't picking up, and maybe she could answer. When I explained the story, and specifically when I told her the conversations, and when I told her about the prayers that she had, the visions that came to her in her prayers, that's when she just completely, I remember she was standing by the stove, and she had to go sit down, and her mouth and her eyes were wide open. And she said, I have to tell you something. And I said, okay. And she goes, you died 15, 16 years ago when you were a baby at 6 months. And I didn't want to tell you this until it was the right time, because really it didn't seem like it was super important. But at this point, I think it's important that we share the story with you. And she said everything that I had said to her, everything, including the prayers, including the things that she was thinking about, were exactly spot on. She said to her, that's what really drove this home. She thought, well, maybe you might have heard this from somebody, but there were only very few people that had known about my death. And but she goes, you remembered everything that I went through emotionally, and I never told anybody. She said, I never told anybody about my prayer in the church. I never shared that part with anybody. And yet you know the exact way it happened, and the exact words and the exact visions. She said, that's impossible. It's 15 years later, and you're talking about something when you were 6 months old. And so, yeah, so at that point, she sat down and she said, you know, I always thought that the miracle was the fact that you had lived. But now I'm realizing that the miracle is actually like what happened afterwards. All of what you're now talking about, this is a miracle. And I'm going, okay. I'm 15, 16 years old. I'm just like, I was just really happy that I had an explanation for what some of this.
What do you do with that? I mean, now that you have that, okay, I have the validation. Now what?
Well, that's the great thing, right? Now what, right? Because I realized at that point that felt good at the moment. You know, I walked away feeling really vindicated for having these dreams. And by the way, those dreams pretty much ended after I shared the story with my mom. And I thought that was it. It was just like a way to put closure to something. But what it did was it opened up everything at that point. What I didn't realize that was the beginning of a very, very long process of awakening, of going through a spiritual identity crisis, of coming to terms with who I really am. My clairvoyant abilities that I tucked away for many, many years, the voices that I would hear in my mind that would always speak to me. It was a lot, and I didn't have a way to let it out. And so in the book, I talk about the ups and downs and the lefts and rights and the depression, the massive depression that I went into, and the angry years and the suicidal years. And it was a real long, drawn out process of trying to tuck something away. I later on realized that a lot of this could have been avoided had I just been more open with it. But these kind of secrets, as we were talking about already, are not easy to share. You know, they're not easy. In the book, I talk about the war that is raged within ourselves years before we come out of the closet, the proverbial closet, to other people. It's maddening. And people don't see that. They only see, you know, in my case, I was coming out spiritually, which even 5 or 10 years ago was a big deal. You know, now it's being more well received, and there's a broadening of acceptance, and it's actually taking on a huge momentum. 10, 15 years ago, forget it. 20 years ago, are you kidding me? 30? Forget it. I mean, it wasn't that long ago, okay, 100 years or so, that they were burning or hanging or killing people for this type of stuff. In fact, in some parts of the world, they still are, for the kind of stuff that I was, experiencing and the things that I came back talking about. And so that's my second part to this whole thing. The second part to this whole thing was that, in addition to the dreams that I was having in the hospital, I was also having these simultaneous dreams and visions of myself and what happened to this baby when it really did hit that point where it passed on. And at that point, I felt myself separating out of that whole experience. And I felt myself going into the proverbial tunnel and being drawn into something far away. And the moment I separated myself, I could feel consciously how different that world was than the world that I was traveling into. And I remember landing in this place. I say landing because I was telling you how consciously you just go and you're just there. And somehow, some way, I landed in this place that I knew wasn't here, but it was somewhere far away, and it was still somewhat materialistic, and it was a sea of sand. It was a desert of some kind, and having this experience of being somewhat levitated and seeing these people down just a little bit below me, and they're looking up at me, and this old man that was very decrepit and like begging for something that was with his hands, and he was trying to reach out to something. And this younger boy that kind of gave me the sense it was a younger version of this man was doing the same thing and thinking at the moment that it was me, but it wasn't me. They were looking through me. And I talk about this quite in detail. And when I looked up and I realized that this was this humongous, beautiful, brilliant ball of light that was there. It was like 10 times bigger than the sun. And I remember right away, the first thing I remember was, I mean, there were so many things I remember asking myself questions about, but some of them just stuck out even more. I was like, why isn't this light hurting me? Why isn't it like burning me? Why am I not going like this? Instead, I'm just going, give me more, whatever it is that's coming. And I didn't really have an answer, but I didn't really care, because at that moment I started realizing something was happening to me that was different than anything I had ever felt before. And as the light approached, I could feel it was really, really cool, because the my body was shaking. Every cell in my body was shaking. It was, the closer it got, the higher, the stronger the frequency of that shaking. And I remember feeling every one of my cells, David, as if they were me. It wasn't like I was sitting and going, oh, dang, I am feeling all this shakiness. It was all of a sudden my consciousness went into every one of my cells. And for a moment there, and this is the hardest thing to describe, but it's so important, because at that moment, I shifted my consciousness away from the total me to the individual me, the cellular me. And for that moment, while the cells were really shaking, I remember seeing myself 50 trillion different ways, and being those 50 trillion experiences of myself, begging for this light to come in and sort of feed me and nourish me. And that I remember, because it was like so like mind blowing at the time, even though there were so many things that were blowing my mind. It was like that one just like really resonated. And I was going, okay, remember that, because this one is just way too hard to even explain. And so then right after that experience, this whole thing just kind of engulfed me. And then when I was finally in it all, it started to become really clear to me that this big, huge light was really made up of just an insane number of individual lights. They were just everywhere, that they collectively had formed this light. And I remember the silhouette of these 3 or 4 images that came up to me, and I knew them. They didn't have a face. They had what looked like arms and legs, but I wasn't sure about that. There was no real physical characteristics to these things, but yet I knew them. I knew them as family. I knew them as something that I had experienced for eons, way beyond this earth life, way, way, way beyond. I was finally home, and they surrounded me, and they gave me a huge hug. And when they gave me that hug, that vibration I was telling you I was having with my cells, everything blew up. I mean, what was left of my sense of body, which wasn't really there anymore, that identity to that individual body, it just went, it just blew up. I exploded. It was like one massive explosion of ecstasy. Wow. And at that moment, I could experience everything. I knew everything. I was nothing and yet everything. And I could see all of these images. They were all just standing there watching this. And I knew every one of those images. I knew, and they knew me. And I never wanted to leave. There was just like, there was not even a sense of wanting to go home. I was like, all of the stuff that I had felt as a teenager, everything was answered, everything, and then some. And it was like, I'm fine. I just remember feeling I was home. I'm home again. And I always felt like there was this sense of something else. Like there was this energy of consciousness that was kind of guiding me through this. Later on, as I was remembering more of my experience there, because this took a lot of channeling, I remember going in different places. But for now, I'll just kind of keep it to this piece, because what this stream of consciousness was kind of guiding me through, and was saying, it finally spoke. I never really felt like it needed to speak, because it was kind of guiding me just through frequency. And it finally spoke, and it said, "What do you see?" And it didn't just ask once. It asked a ton of times, because quite honestly, I didn't care to answer them, because I didn't care. I was like, I don't care what I see. I care about what I feel. Leave me alone, kind of a thing. But I knew that, 2 things I knew. One is that I knew at that moment that I wasn't there to stay. And secondly, I also started to realize that whatever it was that they wanted me to see, I really needed to experience this thing, so that I guess I would finish this experience, even though I didn't want to, but they were insisting that I did. So what I realized as I was looking around, and it became amazingly clear to me at one moment, I literally just went, oh my God, I get it. I remember just feeling that sense of like, I get it. And then the moment I did that, I was grabbed by the shoulder and I was thrown through the tunnel. And it was kind of like that tunnel that people talk about. It's just got all of these crazy lights. It was translucent, and I could see, celestial bodies out there, galaxies and stuff. But I was like, it was just this light, and it was going super fast. And next, I literally landed on my bed. I really felt like I went boom. I landed in my bed, and I looked around, and I was sweating, and I started to cry, and I did this every single time. You would think it would get old, but I started.
Did this experience happen like the one with your mother over and over and over again, or just really?
Yeah, and every time I came back, and I was disoriented, and I felt I had touched my home, and I wanted to stay, and I cried like a baby. I didn't want to come. I didn't want to be back. Wow. So I mean, some people get to experience that just once, but I was experiencing it all like Groundhog Day. It was over and over and over again. So that's what eventually drove me to say something to somebody, because I knew I couldn't continue to do that. There was a reason I was having those experiences over and over and over again. So that's it. That's when I went and approached my mom and asked her. She didn't know any of the second part. In fact, I didn't really share a lot of that second part with her. I kind of gave her this, a good, sort of recanting it a little bit, but I didn't really talk to her much about that, because it was enough that I told her that I had experienced my near death physically and what had happened. That was plenty for her. She was already kind of lost. She had already lost it in that sense. But she was very good Catholic. So she was like, oh, me, she was Spanish, right? She was, mijito, oh, my son, And it was like, okay, I'm 15 years old. I don't know if I can handle all this. I just really wanted to brush it off and just move on with my life. So in the book, I talk about all the series of events, what I call the spiritually transformative experiences, the STEs, that evolved from that experiences, the supernatural, the paranormal. There are a lot of them.
Let's talk about some of those. I'm so curious. I also, you came back with clairvoyance.
Yes.
So I would love for you to talk about Caleb, how Caleb came to be, and some of these experiences that you had afterwards.
So the Caleb was with me in that experience of the near death. That was the voice. That was, some would say that was God speaking. It was, yes, but it was this collective of Caleb, which they later allowed me to give them that name. It wasn't one that they had chosen, but we like to humanize things for the sake of helping people to understand this. And so they allowed me to give them the name of Caleb. But that experience, so they were with me since the beginning. I mean, literally, even before the near-death experience. We could get into that as well at some point, but they've been with me throughout this whole experience. And when I was about 6 or 7, and we moved into this house, and it became very apparent that this house had a very, very strong presence of negativity in there, and the beginnings of the hauntings. They were always there at night, especially. I remember being woken up to these sounds and noises of bizarre things that were happening upstairs in the attic, and the sounds of an individual or individuals walking up the steps right on the other side of the wall that led up to the attic, and always feeling a sense of stress that I didn't even know.
That's terrifying. Yeah,
it is. And yet they were always there. They always, I felt them underneath the blanket. They always would say the same thing. They would say, don't worry, they won't hurt you. Your light shines too bright. That's all they would ever say to me, really, at that point. That's all they would ever say. And that was enough. And I would usually just go to sleep after that.
I have a question about that.
Yes.
So you had the light with you, you had Caleb with you, these voices, this collective. with you, but also going on in the house were these low vibration energies.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting to me that that you can have the light and the dark and existing in the same space together. I would feel like your light would get rid of that energy. Like they wouldn't even want to be around you.
Well, that's the misconception. The misconception is that that low vibrational energy consciousness is the way that, kind of a long name. Maybe I can break that into an acronym somehow, someday. But, these conscious streams of low density, a heavier density, okay, that somehow they don't desire to be around the light, or that they're threatened by the light, or that they're angered by the light, when in actuality, they are the old man and the little child in the visions that I had of my near death. They are the ones that are thirsty for that light. It wasn't that they wanted to hurt me. They were just so in pain from not having it anymore that they desired it. And that pain was translated with our understanding as evil and demonic and angry. And it wasn't. Years later, not actually too long ago, I had an experience where I literally was brought back into that house, and I was put in the center of that house and up in the attic. So what had happened years later that I wasn't aware of was that in that house there was there had been a suicide, and there was a little girl that had died by suicide. I guess that's the proper way of saying it, had died by suicide. And she was about 13 years old, and she was very clairvoyant, very psychic. And she had a tremendous light. And we all, by the way, we all have light. We all have tremendous light, okay? It's just how dirty our windows or mirrors are that we can't see through them, okay? She had the shine, okay, as it would be referred to. And she was really helpful in helping other spirits who were making transitions out of this life to go on to the light and become what they are, light again. She would guide them through. But in her case, she was also incredibly misunderstood. And it turns out that she was living there with just her father, and her father was having his own life issues, didn't understand her. He would lock her up in the attic. And after some time, she decided to just to leave. And what happened as a result of that was that when she left behind a number of souls that were, in a sense, trapped in that house, that were there to transition, and she left. And so they had no way of transitioning. They didn't know how to do that on their own. And so they stayed. And so when I came in with the same shine, they wanted so desperately. They were like stepping over each other. Imagine all of a sudden, think about when people are trapped or something, or the hysteria that people have when they want to get out of somewhere where they're seriously threatened. I mean, their actions were misunderstood.
So they wanted to go into the light.
Yes. But yet I was only 7 or 8, and I didn't understand how to even do that. I wasn't until much, much later in my life that I realized that I had come to realize about the little girl. The father also took his life there.
Whoa.
So
this is a Netflix show right here. Your life.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I know. It's pretty crazy. There's a series called Black Mirrors. I don't know what we're supposed to say into this kind of stuff, but this could be a definite episode for one of those.
For sure.
And so I come in, and actually, interesting enough, my brother also had a pretty strong shine too. And we were the youngest of the two, and yet unfortunately his story unfolded in a different way, that he kind of unfortunately played the victim, not because by choice, but because, it just so happened that his storyline went a little different because of the experience, and mine went in this way, In a sense, he kind of stepped in front of the car before I could get hit, kind of a thing. So I was able to keep the shine going. And again, it wasn't that they were threatening. That's why they kept saying, why Caleb kept saying, at the time I didn't know them as Caleb, they kept saying, don't worry, they won't hurt you. That was true. They weren't here to hurt.
And did you, when they were saying that to you, did you acknowledge them as being like a helpful, loving entity, or did you think it was your own voice or your own?
No, I thought it was like an imaginary, but back then, remember, you're 6 or 7 years old. You're not perceiving the world in the way that other people are perceiving it. In my case, I couldn't anyway, even if I tried. They were friends to me, and I knew them as real. I couldn't see them. I didn't have to. I could feel them. Very similar to the way that I felt everything in the actual near-death experience. It was a feeling of understanding that this energy was energy that you knew very well. And so to me, it was no different than my mother putting me to bed and saying, don't worry, they won't hurt you, kind of a thing. It was real, extraordinarily real. As I got older into my early teens, I started, as I talk about in the book, I started to shut those things down. By the time I was for sure 12, 13 years old, I had already written it off as just my imagination, which it was. But I talk about imagination in a much different way, much different way than what we've been led to believe about it. But in the sense that I just kind of checked it off as just, I must have been imagining that I had, these little imaginative friends that were there. And the answer was, yeah, I did. And they were real, but I chucked it off as if they were not real. And so, I did the same thing most of us do. We just forget and move on. We forget about a lot of things and we move on.
So you kind of, you shut the voice, Caleb, out of your life until you had until 15 when you had your near-death experience, or remembering the near-death experience. Yes. And then after that, how long before you started embracing Caleb again? And
well, that's what the way that I sort of drew this out in the book is to give people some life lessons, not life lessons, but spiritual awareness lessons, because this was so fitting for the way that I came to awaken. And I struggled mightily with that experience, all of those experiences. I was basically just in huge denial. PTSD would have been the greatest way to describe where I was at by the time I was in my early to mid 20s. And I just I just longed to have a normal life, which ironically, what is normal, right?
Right.
And so I talk about how I just kept shoving it under the rug, not talking to anybody about it, not acknowledging it. And yet all this time, it's like this big, huge awareness, this voice, which was Caleb, trying to push me closer and closer to coming out of the closet and speaking about my true self, my truth. And all of these truths that came back with me, because I didn't finish telling you that the thing that I saw at the end, which they whisked me back about, was like this massive message to humanity that I wasn't ready to even begin to decipher, much less talk about it with people. And so that message was that when I saw the lights all together, it hit me. And again, remember, I was 15 years old and I was 6 months old, and all of this was happening at one time. So that there was a deeper message to our relationship about what we perceived ourselves to be, and our relationship to this thing, whatever you want to call it, God, source, creator, spirit, whatever, that we had the narrative all wrong. Even now, where we talk about us being, there's a bigger acceptance of us being, this aspect of God, this spark of divinity, this expression of this higherness. Even in some traditional religions, they're accepting this. Remember back then, if you were lucky, if you even had any of that, I mean, you were basically disconnected, born into this world with karma and original sin. I mean, you were screwed.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Just always feeling guilty for everything because we're just bad. We're born sinners.
Exactly. In every which way. I mean, it would, and I mean this in literally every which way. I mean, it's not just the Christian thing or the Catholic thing or any of that. It's just that's the way it was, this way that this life was created, was for us to feel extraordinarily disconnected. But the narrative was wrong. And it was intentional. I want to say it was intentional. And it wasn't done by some evil Illuminati that know everything and are hiding it from us. I wish I could stress that hard. I mean, I wish I could say it was so that people could go, aha, you see, I was. No, it's not like that. It's not like that. But there was this forgetfulness of the truth that had to be done in order for us to experience this life of contrast. And so the real narrative was that we weren't even expressions or sparks of light of this divinity, that wasn't even the whole story. That's just the story that is finally coming out, that's helping us to make that transition to what we really are. The whole story is that we are God, period. We are God. And that's what happened when I saw this. I realized, oh my God, no pun intended. Okay. It's not that we were created by this big oneness that one day decided it wanted to experience itself and therefore it shot out into a million different directions.
Because that's what I've always heard.
Yes. It's that we as individual supreme beings, i.e. as gods, we wanted to experience the natural evolution that you see even in nature of wanting to experience ourselves as a greaterness than what we are as individuals. So we collectively came together, which is why you hear a lot of people who channel talk about the collective, who collectively came together to form the oneness. We formed oneness, not the other way around. And that changes the narrative completely. We are the ones that created the aspect of oneness called God. And so I said to Caleb later on, I said, well, help me understand this in really simple terms. Although that was pretty easy to understand. When you look at it, it makes a lot of sense. But they said, okay, think of it this way. Imagine the ocean. Imagine the ocean, and what's the ocean made of? Unlimited number of little droplets.
Drops, yeah.
Okay. So they said, we want you to view it this way. We contend that the ocean is made up of droplets. And so the ocean is dependent on the droplets to be the ocean. But the droplets are not dependent on the ocean to be the droplets.
That's wild.
So that changes the entire narrative. That is what they wanted me to see before I left. That was the message that I was supposed to bring back to humanity. That we are truly gods. We are God. We created the collectiveness of oneness, not the other way around. Do that and the narrative entirely changes. Entirely. Do that and the buck now stops with you.
Oh, wow.
Pretty big, right?
It's huge. I'm still processing. I have to sit with that for a while.
It's massive.
Yeah, it just turned my world upside down, but in a good way. It's just a different way of looking at it. Because it's easier for my mind to be like, okay, there was one entity that wanted to express itself in so many different ways. So it's like, okay, that one entity is all that there is forever and ever throughout all eternity. But as individual droplets, as individual souls or whatever,
individual
gods.
streams of, individual gods of extreme high consciousness of awareness.
Where did that come from? It's easier for me to think like Big Bang, like, but then like, if you've got all these little individual things, where did those little things come from? Where did we come from? Where did our...
So that is simply addressed in this way. When energy vibrates at an extremely high level, and so the one thing that they have always shown me that I feel very comfortable with, at least at this point of my awareness of accepting, is that there has always been energy. And energy has, like with everything else, a tendency to expand and grow and rise. So energy, as we know, has various frequencies, and the higher, and this explains the Big Bang Theory, by the way. So when energy rises to an extremely high level, okay, it forms a sense of awareness. And when it forms a sense of awareness, energy aware of itself becomes consciousness. And consciousness is another way of saying God. Okay. But it wasn't just a energy that did it. It was a series of streams of pebble-like energies that popped all over the place and became aware of itself at one time. And in that process decided it too, like with nature, it went from being one cell, if you will, to wanting to be more than one cell. And it chose to come together to experience itself in such a magnitude that it couldn't have done by just being individual. It had to come together.
I love that.
Well, it makes sense.
That's so fucking cool. It's so cool. It's so cool to think about. So we're just, the oneness is just
by the way,
expanding.
So by the way, in that process of doing that, in that process of vibrating so explosively high, energy also has a tendency of reaching a point that it will implode. When it gets to a certain level, it implodes. It gets so high, it implodes. At least in these realms of dimensionality. Okay. And so when it implodes, it starts to detangle itself. It spins in the opposite way. And when it does that, it gets heavier. And when it gets heavier, it creates mass. And when it creates mass, the Big Bang Theory. And this happens everywhere. There is not just one universe. There are trillions of universes. David, are you still
I know.
there?
I'm there. I'm just thinking about it. I'm just thinking about, like, so are all the universe just, is love, what is love? Are we love?
Yes.
And is love the foundation?
We're also joy. We're also harmony.
So is love, joy, harmony, connection, all of that the basis of all the universes that are formed out there?
Yes.
So there's not some universes that are just completely different, or, I mean, they're different, obviously, but it's all this made from the same stuff.
It's all made from the same stuff, which is why it is impossible for us to be able to experience a dimension, a higher dimension, whereby the fears and drama and hate and suffering and demonic and satanic and whatever else we put labels on this negative energy, it is impossible for us to experience that at the higher realms. And I'm not even talking that high, fifth dimension, higher fourth dimension, fifth dimension, sixth dimension. It is impossible for those energies to exist, because I already told you that as energy rises, it becomes faster and it becomes lighter. And that, by definition, means that the heavier density energies, the ones we give labels to, such as demonic, satanic, and all that stuff, cannot exist in the higher levels beyond the third, fourth, and into the fifth dimension. It cannot exist by universal law. They cannot exist. However, we have chosen to give these entities a sort of demigodish feel to them, of power, of beings, of that supremacy of supernatural. It defies the nature and the laws of the universe. We can't. Those are all man-made in terms of our perceptions of which is why I tell people there is no such thing as anything like Satan or devil or anything. It can't. There's no, by definition, it cannot exist. But we give them that quality. We give them that power perceptually in the third dimension.
So that makes sense. The whole imploding and then falling, it's like the fallen angel, right? It's like you get so high vibrationally and then you implode on yourself.
As long as you realize the fallen angel isn't really an angel, it's just energy.
Energy, yeah. I'm just a metaphor, right? Yeah, for energy.
The only reason I stopped there was because, there's always this imagery of the fallen angel being the fallen angel.
Yeah, I guess that's true too. So yeah,
there is.
I'm just trying to make connections here for my brain is just like trying to like grasp onto everything it knows.
I could tell your eyes are rolling. Your eyes are rolling back so hard. I could only see the whites of your eyes right now.
Oh no! I'm like a great white shark over here trying to figure it out.
I was like, David, come back.
Come back. I'm here. I'm just like, you're giving me new information and I love it. Yeah. This is a really, really great way of thinking about it. I'm gonna be thinking about this all day now.
I have a feeling you are. Hey, David, where are you, man? He's been like this for a couple of weeks. I don't know what to do about it.
Oh man. So, okay. I don't even know what questions to ask. So what?
We're all done. Thanks, David.
See you later.
See you later. Bye-bye. But those are really, that was one of the messages that came back. And so you can see the impact that it could have on this whole reality. And this is what the whole awakening process is all about. It's not my truth. It's not something that's only being held to a certain level of frequency that you have to die to get it. In fact, we're here to live forever. In fact, you hear just up until 10 years ago, 5 years ago, today still, you hear that we're not supposed, our bodies can only live so long. We're all die. We're not here to die. We never were, but the way the game was designed, we did for the sake of continuing the narrative. But we're not here to die. And in this period that we're in now, we're not here to die. We're not here to physically die anymore. We can literally live in these bodies, which we won't because we'll evolve out of them, but we could literally live forever. That's what the whole term heaven on earth was meant to be.
So from your understanding and your own experience, what happens when we shed the bodies?
We become light.
And what does that mean?
Which means we are light. We are consciousness, energy expressed in the spectrum of light, in whatever density of light you're in, is light. It's just the expression of energy. We become conscious. We become we don't become. We are already. Mm-hmm. Okay, we are already. We just become aware of ourselves in that light as we exist in lower dimensional energy. So there's an expression, biblically speaking, and I'm not a biblical person, okay? Which, by the way, I do have to mention something else that came to me years later. There was an affirmation of this "we are gods" kind of thing, but there's an expression that says, one is in this world and not of it. And that is when you are able to master the divinity that you are, which is what we always associate with the great masters like Yeshua and Buddha and others, that they went beyond this world to experience themselves in some other aspect of consciousness. Well, we're all supposed to do that now, and we're all capable of doing that right now. We don't have to spend lifetimes more doing it. We're not here to shave our heads and wear robes or climb up in the mountains and disappear. This is what we're here to do as spiritual beings, as gods. We're here to wake up to that truth again, okay? And that truth is that we've always been energy. We've always been consciousness. We've never been attached to a body, at least not one body. We're attached to everything. Your body isn't just the body that you call David. Your body is that room that you're in. Your body is those books behind you. That body is everything. You are the everything. Everything in that room has consciousness. This isn't meant to be a flowery metaphor to anything. It is what you are. And so when you strip away the body, you come to realize that you are everything. You are what Caleb would say, you are nothing and yet everything to all. Well, how's that possible? How can you be nothing and yet everything to all? Nothing yet everything to all. And they later on told me that the nothingness represents the fact that you disentangle yourself from every aspect of physicality. You no longer give yourself a label of anything. So you become nothing. You become nothingness. Mm-hmm. And that allows you to be everything to all.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, you could sit there and go, "Oh, man, he's not all this philosophy." It's not philosophy. I mean, although I'll tell you, philosophy, unfortunately, was discarded and said it was a bunch of mumbo jumbo, when in actuality, philosophy had the secrets to the universe. And this is one of those secrets. You're just light.
Light. Now, do we take our identity or parts of our identity with us?
Always. That's the beauty of expanding into everything, into that everythingness. You can take all of that. You do take all of that with you.
You take it all. So, and we've lived multiple lifetimes. So do we choose to come back into
thousands of lifetimes, tens of thousands?
Do we travel together as souls?
Some aspects, depending on what the objective or plan is.
Because I feel like there's certain people in my life where it's just like they come in and I'm like, whoa, we've done this dance together. We've done this together. We've been together. There's something very familiar with this experience that's otherworldly.
So yes. So for some people, that experience does translate into past lives. Okay. For others, and this also includes even the past lifers, but for others who have evolved from other schools, let's just call it, all right, from other experiences, the feeling that you get is that you have been with this person, but not necessarily in this lifetime world, not in this world. Okay, I'll just put it that way. Not in this world. And those are the people that you have been with for eons in other parallel realities, in other universes, in other dimensions. And those are your real kind of family friends. Family is very broad in the definition of the universe. Family is pretty much everything. Remember, I told you I was in this light, and there were trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of individual expressions of light, of being, and I knew every single one of them as if they were a family. And that's because they are. There is a different definition of family. And you're starting to actually see that now in the way we interact with each other as human beings. Mm-hmm. In other words, we're not just consumed by the biological family. We're looking for our tribe.
100%.
We're looking for something beyond the biological. We're looking for the spiritualness of the connection. That's our true family. And what we're finding is that we can have a relationship with somebody that it would be considered just a friend, whose love is very much more of a family. Like, you are truly my brother. You are truly my sister. You are truly, truly, to me, stronger than even the relationships I once had with my family.
I hear that so strongly. It's, living in LA, so far from my family's in Texas. I've just come across so many beautiful souls that have become my family, my soul fam. And I can name everyone on my journey that I'm like, you're soul fam. You're like, I know you. I knew you before I knew you.
Yes.
And it's like my heart is full every time I'm with,
Yes. And so that creates this kind of confusion in your mind, because like going, how can I feel this way for somebody that biologically isn't my brother? Yeah. And yet you feel this bond that is so deep that transcends the body, and you know them as your true brother.
Yep.
As your true sister. And they're everywhere. Yeah. They're everywhere. But the ones that are really the ones that represent the 3 or 4 that kind of circled me are the ones that are even closer. There's this sense of like, well, we have really done a lot of things together in our spiritual life. And the mind couldn't even begin to wrap itself around what that means, because it's a lot. It's a lot. And that's why we see it now in the way we're expressing ourselves, as small clusters of humanity start to come together. And, oh, wait, what's this? Come together? Individuals coming together?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so that is natural. That is part of the evolution.
Yes. Oh, this is so great. This is so great. Have you ever, to get back to, I mean, you're clairvoyant already. I was going to ask if you work with any plant medicines to go back to that space. For me,
that's a really good question. So I, excuse me, I work with a lot of students because we were talking about this beforehand. This whole awareness thing is monstrous. It's huge, and it's what people are waking up to. And so I've been working with students to guide them through their awakening, so that their awakening isn't like the way that I did it, because we're not here to, for those who have already evolved into that space of awareness, we're not here to watch everybody else go through their trials and tribulations and suffer through all of that. This is a time to rejoice, and to get them through the last piece of this celebration is to graduate. And so some of these people are stuck, though. They get it, they feel it, they even have clairvoyant skills. They everything about their essence is that I know and I understand, but I somehow can't get quite to that becoming stage. So I suggest to them, take some sacred plants. Particularly, I suggest, you might want to consider mushrooms. The chemical, I forget the chemical that's in them.
Psilocybin.
Psilocybin, thank you. Again, where I come from, there are no labels. So for me, labels are really tough to get grasp onto. But the psilocybin is a frequency of consciousness, just as it is the chemical that is inside ayahuasca. It's a frequency of consciousness, a portal, if you will, to aspects of who you are in the greaterness of everything.
It's a total gateway. It's like a doorway. Gateway. Yeah.
And it gives you a glimpse. It gives you just enough of a glimpse to see what you're really about. Not your potential, but who you really are. People oftentimes believe that it's a glimpse to what you can be. Again, I stress to everybody, you are already there. And so the psilocybin and what was it that's in ayahuasca? Do you know?
Dimethyltryptamine. It's DMT.
DMT. Thank you.
Yeah.
Dimethyltryptamine. All right. Yeah. I just don't know why these words have so long. So DMT, those are gateways. But you have to be very careful, because especially with DMT, the mushroom, not as much. In fact, very little, because the mushrooms, the frequencies of those plants are designed to help handhold you through a beautiful experiences of awakening. When you get into ayahuasca and the high levels of that, if you're not mindful of your frequency, one of two things are going to happen. You're either not going to feel anything at all, which a small percentage of people say they never experienced anything, that really nothing came out of it. They're so asleep that they can't. The consciousness doesn't even try to penetrate through that. The more likely scenarios is that you're not going to have a pleasant experience. These are not meant, especially ayahuasca is not meant to be a casual recreational.
Right. You have to be called, first of all. Your soul knows if you're ready for it. And if you're not ready for it, then don't do it.
Then don't do it.
Right.
Don't do it. There are many great shamanic people that can help guide you through this with the plants that are there to help you kind of take your first baby steps, and even deeper steps, much deeper steps into the world of your inner self with the mushrooms and the psilocybin. So they can help you through that. But that was a long-winded way of saying, I've never done ayahuasca. I've only done a little bit of mushrooms, because I was told in just a little bit that I did, which for most people didn't even do anything for them. For me, I went into multiple worlds. It was their way of saying to me that you don't need this. You're already what you're seeing is already sufficient.
Yeah.
There's no need to handhold you into this kind of thing. So I'm not ruling it out for myself, but I just don't have any desire at this point to do any of that because I'm getting enough as it is.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I was just curious.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah.
Well, I really, really, really. I have a nutritional company, and we do nutritional products. We create them, and we do superfoods as a way to provide nourishment to the temple of the body. And one of the things as a company that we have looked at is the future of these sacred plants, which will one day become all legal, all of them. In the world that we're going, the world that's here, whatever you feel, what your belief systems are, those are welcomed. These are, again, streams of consciousness that are here to help, not to hurt.
I believe that they were placed here for a reason for us. Yep. And there's just, I have never experienced magic until I started working with ayahuasca and psilocybin. And, it opened up my entire world. It opened me up completely. And I don't recommend it for people who are predisposed to mental illness. But for those of you who are called to do it, if it's really calling and nudging you, and you're in a safe place and it's done legally, then I highly recommend it. Because for me, I mean, I touched the divine, I was able to like peek beyond the veil. And yeah, there really are no words. There really are no words.
I know. I can see it. It's coming.
Yeah. My very first video I posted was my mystical experience that I had. And it's hard to put into words, but
I know.
But it's a knowing. It's gnosis. It's like this knowing. This understanding of, I get it. I get it. Yeah. Thank you.
Exactly.
Franco, is there anything I'm sure there's so much we've missed that we've not hit on.
David, we just literally touched the tip of the iceberg.
I could talk all day with you.
Thank you.
Is there anything that you'd like to share before we say goodbye?
I guess the only thing that I want to impart on people is that first and foremost, to remember, even if it's hard to embrace it yet, that you are God. And in time, even if that doesn't resonate with you right now, in time, that's going to become a reality to you. And when it does, it will do what, like David is talking about, what I have talked about. It will expand your consciousness and your awareness into places that you never imagined you could go as a living, quote unquote, human being. You are God. And that message is a message that is going to start. And whether you want to call it God, spirit, source, whatever, you are that. You have always been that. You are not striving to be that. You are there already. In other words, you're perfect. You just have to remember it now. And the remembering part is the part that's going to take a toll and play some, it's going to be challenging because you've spent your entire life, everybody has spent their entire life being told we're not, or we're far from it. Even as human beings, we're barely able to pass the acceptance test. So that's the big message. But along with that, and as hard as that is going to be for people to accept themselves as perfect, this is a simulation. This whole thing is a simulation. And we didn't get into any of that. But what that means, what's that? Next time.
I said next time.
But what that means in a nutshell is that this is all a game that's hardwired to you as consciousness. And therefore, it gets back to rule number one. You are God. Okay. And the sooner you can embrace the first truth, the faster it's going to be for you to embrace the second truth. And that we're living in a period right now, not 100 years from now, like some people were saying just even a few years ago, 700 years from now, 50 years from now. No, it's now. We're here. This is it. This is exactly what every ancient culture, every indigenous teaching, every great master man and woman, every science and mathematics that you can think of new age, not the ones that are been entrenched in the last 100 years, everything is pointing to this period. And what's this period? The period of great awakening, the period of bringing this thing called heaven to earth into reality, into this reality, not the third dimensional reality, but the reality we've always dreamt of having. It's now. And in the next year or two, those realities, those affirmations of this thing that's here is going to become very real. Things are going to change and are changing already, and it's going to be massively different. You go, oh, wait a minute. We haven't really seen much change in the last 20, 30 years. We will see more change in the next year or two than we have ever experienced in the lifetime of 10,000 plus years of this humanity combined will happen in the next year.
God, I hope so.
It will. It will. It's here. It's here. So hunker in.
Get to work, everybody.
Get to work.
I was gonna, you know what? I'm gonna save that question for another time. But
all right.
Where can people find you, Franco?
Well, I have a website. It's called The Closet Spiritualist, and I do need to stress the because there's another website that's called Closet Spiritualist, but you won't find me there. It's theclosetspiritualist.com, and I do have Facebook, Instagram, and stuff. You can find all of that on the website. You can find out about the teaching that I offer, which is it's called the Way of the Inner Child, and it's a practice that was lost thousands of years ago. It was shown and taught and spoken by all of the great teachers and masters throughout the course of history. It was intentionally lost and is now being brought back to show people the way in which to awaken in a very loving, innocent, wonderment, magical way, versus the way that we've made it into an extraordinarily complicated science. This is referenced in all sorts of different religions, all different cultures. The one that I'll just bring to light, although Buddhists know this and Hindus know it, and all of these, is that there's this expression in the biblical sense of the way to the kingdom of heaven. Yeshua spoke of this, and the way to the kingdom of heaven can only be through the small child, the child. And everybody thought, oh, isn't that cute? Isn't that sweet? That child that Yeshua refers to, the Buddha talks about in terms of the entry into the unknown, the gateless gate, all those things, that is the essence of innocence and magic and wonderment that makes up the core essence of this oneness known as God. Understand that, play with that, and you will access the kingdom of heaven like that. And so I teach that, and I teach it to people who are called and are ready to do it. And it takes a few months, 3 to 4 months, and it's there. And so I do that. I do consulting, I do speaking, everything there. You can find all of that information on my website, and reach out to me if you'd like. I'd love to hear from you.
Thank you so much. My inner child is screaming right now. I'm going to go play. I'll see you later.
I can see that. You're like, done. I'm out of here. This is Friday afternoon. I am gone. I'm gone.
Well, it's been a pleasure. It really has been. I've had such an amazing time talking to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it too. The conversation we had here, and even the one we had just before. So thanks, David. I look forward to coming back.
Awesome. I'd love to have you. All right. Take care.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.